Good morning, good afternoon and good evening viewers from wherever you are from in the world. It is I, Matt from the Tuning Store. Today we're going to be doing a short video on 3 different ways to lower your car. So you may have seen from some of our Cars and Coffee meets and some of our videos a variety of different lowered cars, and you'll be thinking to yourself, how have they done that? Or what have they used to do that? So we're going to cover 3 different options today, and those options are springs, coilovers and air suspension. Number 1, let's talk about springs. Springs are the most cost-effective way to lower your car. Personally, from a fitter's point of view, they're at least one of the most tedious ways of doing it. How does a spring work? So you can see on this coilover we have here, obviously it has a spring. So instead of buying the whole strut and spring together, all you are purchasing is just the spring. You're taking apart your OEM shock, popping the top mount off, changing the spring, putting the new shorter one on, and obviously once you put it back together, top mount back on, your spring will be 30, 35 mil, 40 mil lower, depending on what you have bought. Why is that harder? Well, because instead of just taking the shock off your car, putting the new shock on, obviously you've got to take the shock off, you've got to take the shock apart, which is a bit tedious. I think if we can put some B-roll up of me doing it on my own car recently, it's a bit of a ball ache, yeah. And putting it back together and then putting it back on, it's double, if not triple the time it takes to fit coilovers or air struts. But pros, there are pros to it. Obviously it's a lot cheaper. So a set of springs, for example, if I name KW as an example, you're probably paying around £300 for 4 springs. And that, like I say, will lower anywhere between sort of 25 and 40 mil if you're lucky. But you are fixed with that. So if you lower your car and you live on a residential street like most of us do in Britain, and you come across a speed bump, you kind of just have to send it. You can't really do anything about it. But they're cheap. That's about it. So for the purpose of this video, we are only doing these 3, springs, coilovers and air suspension. There is an in-between for coilovers and springs, which is height adjustable springs. That's what I did on my Jag. The pros of doing that is obviously if you don't want to spend coilover money, or for me it was that I didn't want to change the actual shock because I have adjustable driving modes, adjustable dampening, I wanted to keep it that way. So that is one reason why you would do springs or height adjustable springs. So for the purpose of this video, if we base costs off of a Mark 7 Golf, these would set you back about 300 quid. The only thing to take into account is if you're not fitting these yourselves, which is quite difficult to do on your driveway at home, an installer, they would probably charge you a fair bit more than just fitting coilovers. If they know what they're doing, they know that it's going to take a lot longer, so just bear that in mind. Option number 2. Coilovers. So this is probably the most popular way of lowering your car in the country, probably in the world. It gives you the most all-round, cost-effective way of lowering your car while being able to adjust it. So obviously you've got your new shock. Depending on what company you go with, you can get different sort of load ratings. So BC, they have a massive variety, different variety of load ratings, so which sort of comes down to the firmness of the shock essentially. With coilovers, you do often get rebound, dampening, compression adjustment, which is very handy if you're going to be doing things like tracking the car. But the most important difference is obviously you can adjust the height of the spring. So once you've got the coilover on, obviously the spring is a set height in terms of lowering itself. That doesn't really make sense, but it also does. Yeah, if you find that the car is too high or too low, you can adjust the lock rings and make the shock taller or shorter accordingly. That is a massive benefit, but they will set you back a little bit more than springs. I'd say coilovers for a Mark 7, typically, if we were to look at BC Racing or someone like KW, you're looking around the £1,000 mark for a decent set of coilovers, I'd say. I think what we've done coilovers on our Yaris, we've done KW, we did BC Racing extra low coilovers on our S2000. They drove wicked considering that was scraping the floor. And we did Palms 997, that's just to name a few. So yeah, we love coilovers, everyone loves coilovers, can't really go wrong. So I can't think of too many cons of coilovers. Obviously they cost a little bit more than springs. In terms of fitting, again, it's easier than springs. You literally take your old shock off, put your new shock on, do the hokey pokey, you turn around pretty much. No, coilovers, they are solid. That's sort of the benchmark we'd recommend when it comes to lowering a car. If you're not too sure, we'd say, right, start at coilovers, and then we'd sort of work either way depending on your budget. One thing to remember when you are changing your shock, a lot of these modern cars, they come with electronic sort of dampening control, EDC, or DDC if you have an Audi. A million different things people call it. But that basically means that in things like an S3 or a Golf Mark 7, for example, you often have different driving modes which can sort of firm up the suspension. Sometimes it's done magnetically, sometimes it's done through fluid. But if you change the shock, obviously that sensor that plugs into your old shock doesn't plug into anything anymore, because a lot of these don't come with that, especially at sort of the entry-level price range. So you will get an error pinged up on your dashboard saying something's up with the suspension. So to combat that, KW, for an example, they do cancellation kits. They cost anywhere between £300 and £500 typically, depending on what you drive. Think of it as a plug blanking off your sensor that is no longer connected to anything. Basically tricks the car into thinking the standard suspension is still there. Gets rid of the error. Right, the third way we would recommend lowering your car, and this is our favourite, we are openly biased here, is obviously air suspension. So, elephant in the room, yes, it is a lot more expensive than the other two. I'll get that out of the way. For a Mark 7 Golf, you're looking just under £4,000 for the kit. So that's management, front struts and rear struts. But that does come with a massive list of pros. So if we go through the similarities first between coilovers and air suspension, obviously you've still got the same threaded body on the shock. That isn't normally to do with ride height, you leave that to the bag. That is normally almost like a follow-up adjustment to the bag. So if you set it up and you're driving and you've got quite a lot of pressure, PSI in your bag, and it's a little bit bouncy, uncomfortable, you'd then adjust the shock normally lower to compensate for that so you can run less pressure. Obviously, another major difference is the airbag. So this, over a spring, so much more comfortable. That's the first thing anyone ever notices when they start driving on air, is just how comfortable it is. You are literally driving on air and you do feel it. The biggest selling point as a daily driver, if you do get this on a daily driver, you can have it proper slam decked on the floor when you're driving around, and if you do come up to a pothole, you can raise it normally way higher than standard. That is probably the biggest selling point of air suspension. So it does still have the compression and dampening adjustment features, same as a coilover. That does depend on what car you drive and what kit you buy. For example, the performance kit comes with camber adjustment on the fronts normally and your rebound and dampening adjustment. If you get the cheaper version, which is a slam kit, that doesn't always have that. The slam kit is essentially the same shock, just minus those features, and it saves you a little bit of money. But if you're going that far in the first place, we'd always recommend going for performance. So obviously, being air suspension, there is a lot more to bear in mind. So it's not just the strut you will be buying. You will also have the management, which you'll need to install. So the management consists of the physical controller that you can use if you don't want to use your Bluetooth app. That sits in the cabin somewhere, normally by the gear stick or down by your knee. That has to be wired all the way through to the main wiring loom and the manifold, which normally sits sort of in the rear of the vehicle, normally in the boot floor, hidden out the way under the floor so you can retain as much boot space as possible. Also in the back, you would have your air compressor, which is obviously what feeds into your air tank. Air tank is quite a big old bit of kit, so normally you will have about half of that on display. It normally just protrudes out a little bit past your boot floor, right at the back against your seats. Depending on how you do your boot builds, that's how we do ours here. Normally, again, we would do that in a Mark 7 Golf. But yeah, so manifold in the back, air tank, compressor, controller in the front, wiring loom, air lines to each corner, as well as fitting the struts. There's a lot involved. I would pay a professional to do it, but at the same time, if you know what you're doing, it's just another thing you can learn, I guess. It's not rocket science. So I mean, just for proof that airlift isn't a gimmick, a lot of people think that it is just literally an up and down show car thing. It's really not. We've got it on an E46 M3 track car to try and prove how solid it is and how reliable it is in a performance environment. We've had it on pretty much all of our demo cars up until last year. So Palm's M3, Raj's M4, Purav's Mustang. Literally, we've had it on so many demo cars. We absolutely love it. And yeah, I think once you go air, you don't go back, to be fair. Okay, so that is it for our very short video on 3 ways to lower your car. I think as a quick summary, if you know exactly what height you want to lower your car by, you're happy with it driving a little bit firmer, go for the springs, nice and cheap, but a fit. If you are somewhat in the middle, you've got about £1,000 to spend, you want full adjustability, obviously coilovers all day long. You can't go wrong with coilovers, absolutely. And lastly, if you want to build something absolutely awesome, get air suspension. All joking aside, obviously budget is a big factor for these, so if you're not sure what you want to go for, drop us a DM, give us a call, drop us an email. We can help guide you through and find out what is best for your needs. If you did enjoy this video, please make sure you like the video, just so we know. If you're finding it interesting, please subscribe to the channel so you can keep up to date with what's going on. We've got some really cool builds coming up, some people that really think they're quite funny, which is probably the most entertaining aspect to watch. But that is it, so thank you very much for joining me for this video. We're going to jump straight onto another one. I think we're going to go and do a feature episode of lowering Palms M3. But thank you very much for watching, and we will catch you next time. Okay, so number 3.